Hey everyone, and welcome to this, my first of, I forget if I have 2 or 3 videos on this one, the Bronica S2A. My first of some number of videos about this, the Bronica S2A. This is a pretty fantastic camera. It is a 120 film, medium format, 6x6, means that the negatives use 120 film and that the negatives are this big. As you can see, the images are the size of this opening. It's a pretty good sized image. Interchangeable lens, SLR. It has no light meter because it has no battery, no electronics at all. Has shutter speeds from 1 second and bulb up to 1,000th of a second, and then X is your flash sync. I couldn't find specific data for things like the viewfinder magnification and frame coverage, but insofar as I can tell, it's 100%. There are some framing lines in there which you might be able to see, you should be able to see right along there is a lighter colored line. That framing square is 4x4. And then there's about another centimeter on each side of it. So it's about 6x6. It's pretty darn close to life size, or near as makes no difference. So this has a pretty amazing viewfinder on it. The coverage within that 4x4 is about 85%. But if you go to the whole thing, I think it's about 100%. The focusing screen is a standard matte, but there are custom focusing screens that could still be had even today, third party. So you can see the matte that doesn't do any good. You can see the matte right there. Let's see if we can do any better than that. There we go. You can kind of see what it looks like. And the flash sync on this camera is at 1/15th of a second. So if you set this to 1/15th and slower, the green numbers, your flash will sync. It will also sync at X, which is 1/40th of a second. So if you're using an X flash, which is any modern flash, and what you should be using, it's one of the green or bulb, and then X. The Bronica S2A was a professional SLR. It was a response to Hasselblad. These were built to last a long time and be reliable, and the S2As are. The S2s have issues, and the older ones have some issues as well, but the S2A and the C2, especially the later C2s, are really good cameras. So this video, what we're going to be talking about are the S2A, also the S2 because it's functionally the same camera, and then the C2 as well because it's the same, except for the S2A has, and the S2 have a removable film back, and the C2 does not. And then there's a little bit of a styling difference here on the C2 as well. Personally, I think the C2 looks a little bit better. I like the way the lines flow on it, but functionally, the S2A is, I think, one of the, if not the best, 6x6 TLR ever made. Of this vintage, it's definitely the best. Bronicas were one of the wedding photography trade's top choices for cameras. The others that were known for wedding photographies were Kowa and Hasselblad, though Hasselblad to a lesser extent due to cost. Wedding photographers, a lot of them used Bronicas because they were reliable and could be used for a long time and had consistent performance. So this was made by Zenza Bronica Industries in Tokyo. The S2 was made from 65 until 69. The S2 picked up at 69 and was made until 72 with an updated S2A from 72 to 77. The updated S2A added an S2A in front of the serial number, as you might be able to see here on this spare back. So you get that. There's the serial number right up there. You can see how it says S2A. Actually, it says it at the end. I take that back. So the latter versions of the S2A had that at the end of the serial number. The earliest S2As did not. And we'll talk about how to identify an S2 versus an S2A by serial number, either later in this video or early in the next, I forget which. Anyway, this S2A is has the older style of strap lugs, so we know it's one that was built between 69 and 72. And this spare film back, because it has the S2A serial number, we know was built between 72 and 77, assuming that film backs weren't made after that. This was preceded by the S, and the C2 was preceded by the C, and this was followed by the EC, I'm sorry, this was concurrent with the EC, the ECTL, and the ECTL2, as well as many of the ETR bodies. However, this was followed by nothing directly, because what came after this was the SQ series, which was their next 6x6 SLR, but it used a different mount, and it was much more electronic, and it didn't really resemble the S2A in terms of form and function any more than this resembles the Hasselblad in terms of form. This is, let's go over this camera as we do with all of the different things on it. I'm going to start on the top. Right up here is the viewfinder release button. What that allows you to do, if I can remember which way to press it, come on, there we go, is to take the viewfinder off, and there are prisms and different things like that which you can pop on it in lieu of the standard focusing screen. The standard focusing screen itself pops up, and then it has this magnifying glass that allows you to do fine focus when you look through it, and you get the magnifying glass simply by pushing backwards, and then you close it, and everything's ready to go. There we go. This is the viewfinder release button to pop up the viewfinder. Then we have the serial number for the camera body, the serial number for the film back, the film type memo holder, the format indicator, and because that's got some film in it, I'm going to switch to the other back, which is empty. There we go. On the front of the camera, we have a few things here. I'm going to take the lens off right now so we can see just the camera. Okay, so here's the front of the camera. This is the shutter release button. Here we have the depth of field preview button. And then this is the large bayonet release button. We'll get into that later, or perhaps in the second video we'll talk about the mounting system for this camera. The depth of field preview button, if you look down the lens, I'll push it, and you can see it closes down the aperture. So it lets you see approximately what the depth of field will be in your image, but it also cuts out a lot of the light. There we go. On the back of the camera, we've got nothing. On the bottom of the camera here, we have the tripod bushing, and over here we have a cable release port. So if you can either plug a cable into the shutter button here, or like this one is, and then use it, or if you don't want to do that, or you don't want to risk the cable getting into your shot, or you just want to have the camera above you, or for whatever reason you need to have it, there is a second cable release port right there. On the right side of these cameras, this will look different on the C2 than it does on these ones. But what we have here is the film size selection dial. So if you push this button right here, this is the lock for it. You can select 12, which is 120, or 24, which is 220, just like that. And then we have here the winding indicator. This turns as your film is advanced, letting you know it's being wound. Here we have a frame count window. This lets you know how many frames you have taken and how many you have left. 12 for 120, 24 for 220. 220 is not really made anymore, so basically if you have one of these, just set it in 12 and count up to 12 here, and you're in pretty good shape. This is a strap lug. This will look a little bit different on newer S2As. This is the butterfly style, very annoying. Here's your film, your shutter advance lever rather. This is what you use to advance the film and cock the shutter. If you've never used one of these, this is very jarring the first time you use it, and we'll get into this in the second video. On the left side of the camera here, we have the flash PC port underneath this cover. This cover is non-standard, but there we go, PC port for your flash. Shutter speed selection dial right here, which you just do that to select a different shutter speed. This guy right here is your, I think there's an accessory that fits into here and bayonets in, and I think it's basically like an arm for either a flash or for holding the camera like this. I'm not exactly sure. I saw a partial picture of one. I don't really know how it fits in here, but I'm sure that people who know about that will comment in this video, and that's fine. Let us know what goes in here, because I really have no idea. This is another strap lug, and this is your dark slide, which you pull out to allow the film to be exposed to light. Put in like that to cover the film, and push into the camera's body to release the film back. Let's field strip this camera a little bit here, and we'll take a look inside of it. Inside in the front, what we've got here is the mirror. That's the reflex mirror, the aperture control pin, all that stuff, standard internal bits. In the back, we've got the film shutter, the shutter curtain right here. Oops, I think I wasn't supposed to do that. This gear right here is what connects the film back to the winding mechanism. Let's reset this little pin. And then these different pins connect and inform provide a connection with information between the film back over here and the camera. This one in particular lines up with this dot right here. And what this little guy right here does is that's a button that you can depress. Watch the film back as I depress this. At any rate, if you depress this, then that is what tells the film back that it's connected to the camera. This pops out a little bit, and so if you were ever to need to take the dark slide out of your film back without it being on the camera, you could just push that little button right there and take out the dark slide. If we look inside of the film back, now if you have a C2, it's going to look similar to this inside, just still be on the camera. There's a close open switch here. We'll hit open. We have the caddy for the film. We'll see how to load this in video 2, and then the film receptacle area. So let's talk about some of the many notes and interesting things about this camera. I'm going to start with the lens mount. As you've seen, I've taken off what I referred to as the large bayonet. There's also a small bayonet here. Has a separate focusing helical from the lens here. And what we're going to do is we'll talk about the different focusing mounts, the different lens mounts a lot in the third video, because there's a lot of content to go over there. One really interesting thing about this lens mount is it has a 57mm thread right there on the inside, which allows you to, for instance, take a 4x5 lens, put it on some macro tubes, some generic macro tubes with interchangeable mounts on them. Anything except the Sony Alpha mount size will work. These were either Pentax or Nikon. Coincidentally have a 57mm thread, so you can mount large format lenses that way, and then have a flash sync speed at any speed because you're using a leaf shutter. We'll talk also about this in the third video when we'll detail everything you could ever possibly want to know about this lens mount. If I can figure out how to get it back on, that'll be even grander. There it goes. And next, this one. Actually, the harder one to get on. There we go. If you have those 57mm macro tubes and a 57mm to different copal size adapter, we'll see how I put together my large format lens adapter for this in the third video. Gives you a lot of flexibility. Also, there was a tilt shift bellows system for this. I don't have it. Basically, it looked like a macro bellows, except that it had 4x5 style motions for the front standard, so you could lift and raise your lenses and tilt them and swing them around. So if you had that and a body cap for your Bronica that you could put on the end of that and a large format lens, you could drill a hole in that body cap and mount large format lenses on the end of that bellows and get infinity focus with them, but also get all of your large format movements. So there was a lot of creativity intentionally built into the mount for these cameras, and a big part of that is that 57mm thread. One other major advantage of the Bronica system over competing systems is that regardless of whether or not your shutter is armed, the film back can be taken off and replaced. Not every system can say that. If your shutter's armed, you can replace the film back. If it's not, replace it. If it's halfway wound, replace it. That's fine. The gearing in here, and I've tried this, the gearing in it prevents it from advancing beyond an additional frame. So let's say, for instance, I had already wound this and I was on frame 6 and I was ready to shoot. Okay, darn it. Need a different film. Oh, haven't wound that. I can wind it. That's okay. Well, I can't now because this has film in it and it's actually wound. Or let's say this has not been wound, but this one has been, and you put it on. You can now wind it to arm the shutter without advancing the film. So that's something that's very complex and mechanical in the gearing in here. And like I said, most of the other systems didn't have that. So some things not to do with your camera. Don't store the camera with the shutter ready to fire. Always trigger the shutter before you store it, just like that. And then when you use it, you can re-advance it. But you don't want to store it like this because there's tension on the springs, and if you store it armed, you will weaken the springs with time. Don't touch the shutter curtain because that's a good way to ruin a completely good shutter. Don't touch the mirror because that's a good way for the oils on your finger to take the silver off and make it very hard to focus. Also, don't leave your camera or lenses in your car because it can be damaged by heat and cold. The heat can get the oils to make them really thin and get into places they aren't supposed to be, especially lens apertures. Or the cold can make them really gummy and cause them to break down and get thick so that they don't lubricate properly. Plus, a camera in a car is a really good way to come back to a broken window and no camera. Also, don't store your gear in a plastic bag or box. Now, I will say that I do store these in a Pelican box, which is plastic, but I also keep a desiccant, a rechargeable desiccant pack in there. So you can do that. If you have a plastic bag or box, just make sure you have a rechargeable desiccant and that you recharge it when it needs to be recharged. Also, don't let these get wet. They don't have weather sealing and they are all mechanical, and internal components can rust or corrode with water, and getting this wet can definitely ruin your camera. So if it starts raining and you're out hiking, just make sure you can cover this, and definitely don't immerse it in water. So that's it for the first video about the Bronica S2, S2A, and C2. In the next video, we're going to go through this camera and we're going to talk about what all of the functions on the camera are and how to use them. So if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and creating content which is useful for you. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. And I'm pretty good about responding to comments on a regular basis. And last thing, of course, is thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in video 2.